Okay, so ready to like dive deep into the hidden parts of your personality. Because today we are going all in on embracing your shadow
Oh,
self
yeah.
with this book.
Sounds intense.
It is pretty intense. It's called Embracing the Shadow, a chaos magic journey through shadow sigil integration
Okay.
by Ewell J.
I
Juliana.
like it already.
And it's this really cool blend of psychology and practical magic. Like they kind of come together in this really interesting way.
And what's really interesting about Juliana is he takes this idea of the shadow self, which can be kind of scary. And he's like, no, this is like where the good stuff is.
Right.
This is like where we can unlock some serious potential.
Totally. And like who hasn't struggled with those shadow parts, right? The self-sabotage, you're like projecting your insecurities onto other people. I feel like we've all been there.
Oh, yeah, big time.
But before we get too deep into the shadow work, can we talk about chaos magic a little bit?
Great.
Because it sounds kind of intimidating, but Juliana seems to approach it with a real sense of like flexibility and just like figuring out what works.
Totally. Juliana's all about that whole chaos magic ethos.
Yeah.
You know, it's about finding what works for you. There's no dogma. It's about personal empowerment and using these tools to shape your own reality.
I like that.
And he brings in his background too. Like he's a social worker.
Oh, wow.
And he's got these Curacao traditions. So it's like this really interesting cultural blend.
It makes it feel less intimidating, for sure.
Exactly.
Like, especially when you're dealing with something as intense as like your shadow self.
Totally.
Yeah.
And that's where Carl Jung comes in, right? Like
Right.
he's the one who really put the shadow self on the map. He said, it's basically that hidden part of our personality
Yeah.
where we bury all the stuff we do, like the fears, insecurities, even anger.
All the stuff we don't want to admit we have.
Exactly. Even to ourselves.
Yeah.
But here's where Juliana takes it a step further.
Yeah.
Instead of being afraid of the shadow, he's like, let's integrate it. Let's harness that energy for personal growth.
Okay, so how do we do that?
That is the million-dollar question, right?
Right.
Well, he uses something called sigil magic.
Okay.
And sigils are basically these personalized symbols that you create, and they tap into your subconscious mind and help reprogram those negative thought patterns that are associated with our shadow traits.
So you're basically taking the things you don't like about yourself and turning them into something positive.
Exactly. It's like shadow alchemy.
I like that.
So he gives you this step-by-step process in the book where you identify the specific shadow traits, then you decide how you want to transform them, and then you actually craft a sigil that embodies that intention.
So cool.
It's really cool.
Yeah.
And he even includes all these case studies of people who have used this method to overcome some pretty intense stuff, like crippling self-criticism, fear of abandonment.
Wow. Okay, now I need an example.
Okay, so there's this one about a woman named Sophie
Okay.
who struggled with insane self-criticism, like just constantly tearing herself down.
Been there.
Right. But through this shadow sigil work, she actually transformed her inner critic into a source of support and encouragement.
That's
It's
amazing.
pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just like in her head. It actually manifested in her career, her relationships. Her
Whoa.
whole life shifted in a positive direction just from addressing that one shadow aspect.
So you're talking about tangible changes in your life.
Exactly. Not just feeling better,
Mm.
but actually seeing positive changes in your external world.
Wow. Okay, so we're embracing the parts of ourselves that we usually hide, and that's where the good stuff is.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
And it gets even wilder. He starts talking about these advanced practices like hypersigils and multiversal magic.
Oh, multiversal magic. You're going to have to explain that one.
I know, right? We're going deep down the rabbit hole.
Okay, but first I'm curious about the whole emotions piece of this.
Right.
Because we're talking about transforming negative emotions, but are we just trying to like bypass difficult feelings altogether?
That's such a good question. And it gets to the heart of chaos magic and occultism in general, this idea of emotional alchemy. It's not about bypassing anything. It's about understanding that emotions themselves are a form of energy. It's like an alchemy transforming lead into gold. Juliana uses that analogy a lot.
I do love a good analogy. Emotional alchemy. Okay, so we're not managing our emotions. We're like alchemizing them into something else.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
about seeing them not as good or bad, but as energy that we can harness and redirect.
I like where this is going.
Even those like really tough emotions, the ones we try to avoid,
Yeah.
they can become fuel for growth and, yeah, even magical practice.
Okay, see, this is where it gets really interesting to me because it's starting to sound a little less like therapy and a little more like something out of like a fantasy novel.
I know, right?
Especially when we start talking about hypersigils and multiversal magic, which, by the way, you mentioned manipulating timelines earlier.
Oh.
Don't just drop a bombshell like that and not elaborate.
You got it. So Hypersigils,
Okay.
they're like sigils. Could think bigger. Remember how we were talking about sigils being like these personalized symbols?
Right.
Well, hypersigils take that idea and they make it into a narrative.
So instead of a symbol, it's like a story.
Yeah, exactly. Or it could even be like a piece of music or even a whole movie.
Whoa.
And the act of creating it becomes the magical act.
Okay.
So like imagine you're writing a story and your main character is struggling with something that you're also dealing with in your own life.
Okay.
As you write that story, as you have your character overcome those challenges, you're basically weaving a spell for yourself in the real world.
So you're basically tricking your brain into thinking it's possible because you're writing it like it already happened.
That's a really good way to put it. It's about aligning your internal reality with the outcome you want to see in your life.
I like it.
And it doesn't just have to be writing either. It could be painting, it could be music, any creative act, really.
So you're putting your intention into your actions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that actually leads us to multiversal magic,
Okay, here we go.
which takes this whole influencing reality thing to like a whole other level.
Okay.
Because it's based on this idea that our consciousness, it's not limited to just one single timeline.
Okay, so now we're talking about alternate realities.
In a way.
Whoa.
It's like this, we have access to this web of possibilities, this multiverse of potential timelines.
So there's a bunch of me's out there living different lives.
Potentially.
Yeah.
And through our intentions,
Sure.
our actions, even our magical practices, we can influence which timeline we experience.
So it's not even about changing ourselves at that point. It's like
Yeah.
changing the fabric of reality.
Yeah, you could say that. But it's important to approach this with a lot of responsibility.
Right.
We're not talking about like some game.
It's serious magic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's powerful stuff. And Juliana, he really emphasizes ethics.
Yeah, he does.
Because chaos magic, it's not about controlling other people or the universe. It's about understanding your own power and using it responsibly.
Yeah, and I think that's something that gets lost sometimes. Like when people hear about this stuff, they think it's about controlling things, but it's really about understanding yourself.
100%. And speaking of understanding ourselves, Juliana talks about these things called shadow guides.
Shadow guides. What are those? Like, are we talking about like spirit guides, but for your shadow self?
That's a great way to think about it.
Yeah.
And it actually gets to another really cool part of Juliana's work, this idea of using egregores and tulpas in shadow work.
Okay, I'm going to need those definitions.
Right. So egregores and tulpas, they're both types of thought forms.
Thought forms.
Thought forms. They're basically entities that are created by thought and intention.
So not just like imaginary friends, but like real things with real power.
Exactly.